Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Yee. I'm the Director for U.S. Policy and Outreach here at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. For those of you new to C2AS, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to secure a safe and stable climate by accelerating the transition towards a thriving, just, and resilient net zero economy. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Pricing Carbon Initiative's public forum on climate policy at a crossroads, insights and next steps. C2S has long been an active participant and a steering committee member of the Pricing Carbon Initiative. PCI provides a forum that fosters dialogue across the political spectrum on viable solutions to address climate change. And today's forum features a timely discussion on the state of U.S. climate action. Since returning to office, President Trump has taken a whole-of-government approach to roll back greenhouse gas regulations, pause clean energy programs, and expand fossil fuel production, while also withdrawing from global climate leadership. America was on the verge of a clean energy boom, but the actions taken by the Trump administration and the tug-of-war in Congress over the fate of the IRA tax credits for clean energy, all of this creates an environment of uncertainty that will only slow the pace of new investments in clean energy and the building of factories that can manufacture cleaner cars and lower carbon products. From my observation, U.S. climate action rarely follows a straight line. It's not a question of if, but one of when and how. While attention is currently focused on the administration's actions and on the reconciliation proposal moving through Congress, we all know that we need additional policies in the future to address climate change to really accelerate investments in clean energy and industry. This is something that C2S has been actively thinking about, and we're particularly excited to be hosting today's conversation. Before we begin, though, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, we will be recording this webinar. The recording will be made available on the C2S YouTube page within 24 hours. Second, the closed captions function has been enabled for this webinar. So to turn on closed captioning, just click on the button on the bottom of your screen that says CC. And lastly, the format of today's webinar will be a fireside chat followed by a panel discussion. Janet Peace, the head of advisory services for A New Climate and PCI board member, will moderate a conversation with former Governor Jay Inslee, who's been a longtime climate advocate and champion. Following their conversation, Alden Meyer, a principal at Performance Partners, will moderate a panel with Shooting Pomerlaw, the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at the American Action Forum, along with Alex DeGolia, the Director of State and Regulatory Affairs for the U.S. region at EDF, and David Bookbinder, the Director for Law and Policy at the Environmental Integrity Project. We'll have some time for audience Q&A in the discussion, so please submit your questions into the Q&A portion of Zoom, and we'll try to answer that. And with that, let me turn things over to Janet.
Thanks so much, Jason. I really am excited to be part of this initial conversation. Governor Inslee has really been an inspiration on the climate file for years. I just want to, I guess, kind of follow on with your housekeeping. So first, I'm going to hand it over to the governor, and he's going to say a few words, and then we're going to open it up to a few questions from our panelists, and then open it up to questions from the audience. But I just want to start off by saying that Governor Inslee, you really provided leadership not just at the state level, but also when you were in Congress. So multiple levels you've been active on this file, but probably most relevant for this audience today has been your leadership on the climate change file, both within the state and within Congress. I remember when you were working on the energy intensive trade exposed portion, that'll date me a little bit, for Waxman Markey years ago. But since then, you were able to get the Climate Commitment Act passed there in Washington State. But if I'm not mistaken, you retired. You announced that you weren't running again in 2023. So you're still in this fight, though, right?
You bet. Big time.
I thought so. Can you tell us some about that and what you're doing these days?
Well, first off, I'm talking to a great group. If you're on this call, I love you. You're working for my grandchildren and you're part of our family. So I love whatever you're doing if you're on this call. And I just wanted to join you to share a great experience from Washington State and to tell you that I am as excited and joyous about our mutual mission statement here as I ever been. I've been in this fight for literally a quarter of a century. And I'm as excited about it as I was in day one, and for several reasons. And if I may, Janet, let me just share kind of my reasons for still being engaged in this. So by the way, what I'm doing, I'm still in the fight. I'm speaking for a Climate Power organization. I'm working with some clean energy developers to help finance their development. I'm perhaps starting a new nonprofit. So I'm very much engaged in this. I want to tell you why. Several reasons. Number one, this is the perfect moment. And this is the perfect moment to be in this fight. And the reason I say that is it's the most difficult moment with the most environmental destruction happening because of climate change. The biggest climate denier in world history, trying to dismantle all of our climate efforts on a federal level. But I still believe it's like these are great days to be alive. It's like when Churchill, in the middle of the Blitzkrieg in London, they asked him how he felt about it. He said, "These are great days." And they're great days because they're days of consequence, and they're days where you can make an impact, and they're days where you can work together with like-minded people. So these are great days to be alive. And I'm glad to be in this mission statement with you. Number two, these are great days because we have demonstrated in Washington State that a carbon pricing system can be both wildly popular and extremely successful. Let me start with the popular part because that's very important in a democracy. As you know, this was contested, our Cap and Invest bill, our Climate Commitment Act. Last November, these dirty dog millionaires tried to dismantle it, and we went to the ballot, and we won 62 to 38. Now, I've never won anything by 62%, from basketball games to congressional races. So this was a landslide victory. It showed massive support in the public. And over time, that's what's fundamentally very important and critical to our success. But it's also been an extremely economic success. We've gone from maybe $100 million of investments to $3.2 billion of investment over a biennium. And it has been spectacularly successful on the ground, where I've met these people who are overjoyed to have solar panels and drive down the utility bills. I remember talking to this lady. She said the happiest day of her month is when she gets her utility bill now, and it's zero. That's like Christmas in July. So we're seeing EVs. We're the first state to have a leasing program so lower income people can get access to EVs. People are thrilled with their heat pumps. And by the way, now we need them for air conditioning in Seattle, right? When I grew up, I didn't need air conditioning in Seattle. Now we're getting people air conditioning. The transportation infrastructure that we're building is spectacular, from electric school buses on down. So we're seeing the real world impact of our carbon pricing system that is both popular and economically productive and growing jobs like crazy all across the state of Washington. So we've demonstrated the success of a pricing system. I do want to make a note about a pricing system. When I first kind of got into this debate, I majored in economics at the University of Washington. They drilled in the tragedy of the commons to me and the importance to price things at real cost. And when I started thinking about it originally, it was almost sort of a pricing or cost-based system, that we wanted to have a cost associated with an environmentally costly action of putting pollution in the air. That's kind of morphed for me into more that the greatest benefit is on the supply side of providing resources to actually get access to clean energy. And that's almost on the joyous side of this. So I've kind of moved from loving this from a cost standpoint to a benefit standpoint of what you can do for people. And I think that's one of the reasons we want our initiative going away. So third reason I'm very excited is that we still, with all the federal destruction going on, we still have at least 24 states that are in this game. And we got 24 states today that have leadership, which should be moving forward and politically capable of moving forward in the U.S. Climate Alliance. As you know, I started the U.S. Climate Alliance with Jerry Brown during the first Trump administration. We now have 24 states in the alliance. They represent 60% of the U.S. economy. And every one of those states should be eligible for advancing a carbon pricing system similar to the state of Washington. So we have a huge running field, if you will, where we can actually move the ball even when Donald Trump is in the White House. And that's exciting to me. Look, we know they're going to do a lot of damage to our tax incentive program that Joe Biden got through, and some damage to the Inflation Reduction Act. But they can't stop us in these states. Literally, Donald Trump cannot stop us. And I love to think of him gnashing his teeth and being so angry and frustrated that he can't stop Massachusetts from moving forward. He can't stop us. So this is like, you're running, you're in the 20-yard line, you see the goal line, and there's nothing between you and the goal line. That's a joyous feeling, although I wasn't much of a runner actually at all. But so we have open field running ahead of us in at least 24 states. It should give us a sense of ambition. Last thing I'll mention is the technological innovation that's still going on is just incredible. The rate of change, the reduction in solar cost and wind is still coming down. The advanced battery technology is coming on so fast. I know Trump is trying to slow down our R&D in our colleges, but it's still pumping out new technology. I know I met these two young men at the University of Washington. I started a thing called the Clean Tech Test Bed Facility at the University of Washington. I met about 3 or 4 years ago. They had this whiz-bang idea about how to concentrate wavelengths to advance the efficiency of solar cells. They just exited their first startup. They're moving forward, and it's so fun to see small investments that we have made really panning out. We got a company called 12 in Moses Lake, Stanford chemical engineer grads. These guys, these 3 people got an idea. Hey, let's go make jet fuel out of carbon dioxide and water, and they're doing it. And so this rate of technological growth ought to raise our ambitions. So there's 4 reasons to be really excited about being in this battle. It's because it's a great day to be involved in a great mission. We know Cap and Invest works. We've proved it, and it's sustainable at the ballot box. We know we can move in states, and technology is our friend. So what's not to like? I'm glad to be on this call with you, and I look forward to learning something from the people on this call. Thanks, Janet.
Yeah, your enthusiasm is definitely infectious. And I
I
have to
hope
say,
so.
yeah, well, we have to have some enthusiasm to keep going, because this is a tough field, right?
Yeah.
And if you just talk about the negative, you have a hard time moving forward. And I think your point about innovation and investment. I remember when I started in this, we were trying to prove the point that a price on carbon would drive innovation. And Washington State proves that you can have a price on carbon, you can have a thriving economy, you can have innovation and public acceptance, which is super. Can I come back to that one just for a sec? So in Washington State, you called it Cap and Invest. But in California and Waxman Markey, we called it Cap and Trade.
Right.
So do you think that the communications around this type of policy has really evolved? Did you think that helped you at the ballot in 2024, calling it Cap and Invest?
I think it's a little improvement in language, because the word trade evinces views of people in green eye shades trading and making dollars on derivatives and everything else. There's some negative connotations in people's minds to the word trade. Invest is a more positive term of art. I think a more accurate one, actually, because that's really the goal of this. The goal isn't to trade assets, it's to invest in assets and to invest in clean energy. So I actually think it is a preferable language, and it is more accurate in this regard. But I think the use of that language was not the secret of our success. The secret of our success was all of the benefits that we could demonstrate that this pool of funds could give Washingtonians. They now are getting real benefits, and these dastardly evildoers who wanted to take them away from Washingtonians, we could paint them in a very negative light. So we're getting people EVs now, even if you're lower income now, because we're the first state where you can actually lease them. We have a lease program. It's been wildly successful. Same thing with e-bikes. And they wanted to take these benefits away from people, for goodness sakes. You can get a heat pump now. They wanted to take that away. So I think the larger part of our victory was not our wisdom. It was the facts of the benefits that we have been able to develop through a Cap and Invest system. And again, I want to just come back to one of my original comments. I think the success of the program is much more on the benefit side than creating a cost structure. It has changed behavior more on the benefit side than it has on the pricing side. And that disappoints a lot of us economists. I'm not an economist, but I did major in it, where we thought, hey, if we just impose a cost, it's going to change behavior. I actually think more of the behavior has been on what we've been able to do with the investment. But both have value and both are correct. Look, it's just wrong to allow anybody to pollute at zero cost. And I always just liken it to, when you go to the dump, it costs you $35 to dump your garden waste at the dump or whatever you want to dump or recycle. But we're doing it, but polluters are putting this into treating the atmosphere as a dump at zero cost. And that's just wrong. I mean, it's just wrong to treat a community asset, particularly the most important one on earth, right? What's the most important asset to human life? Well, it's the atmosphere. It's this thin blue ribbon, which is only like, 5 or 6 miles wide. And it's such a precious and unique thing. It's unique certainly in the solar system, perhaps in our galaxy, to have this atmosphere. It's like designed for humans. It's a precious thing.
It's
So
also a perfect common property problem, if you remember from your
exactly,
economics.
perfect common property. So this is the tragedy of the commons. And Professor Crutchfield was my econ professor as a sophomore at the University of Washington. He always talked about it as the sheep. You get too many sheep because nobody pays for destroying the pastures. You get too many sheep. It's the same problem.
I'm an economist, so I totally appreciate what you're saying, and but I hadn't really thought about it as really pushing on the benefit side. I could see where that is more compelling, if you will.
But Professor Crutchfield was right, and you're right. But as far as what wins a political battle, it's more on the benefit side.
And you have to know your audience. If you want to sell to somebody, you want them to be convinced, you have to know your audience. And clearly you did. And that the measure by which that measure was defeated in Washington was so huge and so cool.
Right. We won by 62% in the general audience, but by 97.2% amongst all economists.
Okay, well, I'm sure you did. So, but now we have this, we have a new administration, a new president that comes in, and he issues this executive order to block state and local climate legislation. And have you seen any implications from that? How have you had any response from residents in the state of Washington on that particular, or do they even know about it?
Well, it has had an impact. We have it's moved into the top 5 most buffoonish, ridiculous, partisan idiocy of his entire administration to issue that executive order, because that has no impact. He didn't have the authority to do this. He takes press releases and calls them an executive order. Just because you slap your tweets with the word executive order doesn't give it any authority. So it was just one of his many ridiculous efforts to get attention without an impact. So we're moving forward. It hasn't slowed us down 10 seconds, and it won't slow down anybody else either. Now it just, he just wants to show how tough the guy is because he was an insecure child for some reason, which I don't know why. But so if it made him feel tougher and more of a man, that's fine, but it's not slowing us down at all. So I'm not worried about that. Now, we do have concerns, obviously, about some of the other things he's done. He's going to try to remove the endangerment finding, which is the basis for so much of our environmental law. And that'll be litigated. I believe we will succeed. I think it's highly likely that we will preserve that law, which is the foundation of much of 80% of what we do. Because you just can't make an argument that this is not endangering human health. There's no, to find a scientist to do that, you have to go to people who are, in custody and are not free to walk the streets. So I think it's very likely we will maintain that. I think it is likely we will retain the California auto rules because they're going about it the wrong way, but not a certainty. But on those things, we got to be alert and make sure our lawyers are well primed, and they will be. But I think that one way or another, we're going to keep moving forward. And by the way, even if we lost the California rule, there are other ways to go about this. Our low carbon fuel standard is a different way of going about this, which has not been challenged. So we still have a way to attack this fuel efficiency and car efficiency system through other mechanisms, including by financing the transition through a cap and invest bill, where you just go out and help people buy these new products, these whiz-bang non-polluting cars. So we have multiple tools, and we have multiple tools. It's not just cap and invest. We have a low carbon fuel standard with the country's best building efficiency standards. We've got 100% clean electrical grid standard. None of these can be touched by the president. So we're in business no matter what.
And I think, President Biden also believed in providing support and funding, and there were a lot of tax credits, for example, in the IRA, but that's also being attacked, if you will. The big, beautiful bill, the House version, I think at least cuts 60% of the clean energy tax credits.
Yeah, that's a risk. It's a risk. And
do you think states can replace that? They can step in and replace that funding? What do you think?
Well, our cap and invest is in part, but not in total. So yes, we're going to take a hit on the tax cuts to some degree. And these Republicans are going to have to answer to their constituents of why they cratered so many thousands of jobs in their state. And they'll be held to account next November and the following November. There is some modest pushback going on in the Senate, as you know. A couple of Republican senators have said, well, not so fast. We don't want to throw out the entire thing. So they've pushed back the date where the Republicans are going to take away this tax cut. But yeah, we're likely to have a few years reduction in what otherwise would have been the case. And by the way, kudos to President Biden for getting this through, the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax cuts. These were tremendous legislative feats. So we can replace much of these things by a cap and invest, but not the whole thing. But listen, what do you do about this information? You get more ambitious. You work harder. You talk to your governors and your legislators more often. You recruit to this organization faster. I mean, the response to this is fighting harder, not less. That's the way I react to it.
That's amazing. And at some point, folks are going to realize that removing these tax credits they're going to increase energy bills. It's going to increase the cost of a variety of things. But speaking of cost, just a sec here. Washington has one of the most aggressive climate policies in the hemisphere, if you will, and also has the highest carbon prices. How's the state managing the politics of high carbon prices or even high energy prices while continuing to drive down emissions? Are you doing anything to try to lower the costs in the Washington program, linking to others? Maybe talk about what you're doing to try to manage costs.
Well, the first thing we're doing is trying to stop Donald Trump from giving us more expensive electricity, which he's trying to do.
Yep.
In 95% of the areas in the country, solar and wind is cheaper than coal right now, but he's trying to keep coal plants open, which is just nuts. And he's making it illegal, as to the extent humanly possible, to do solar and wind wherever he can quash a permit on federal or private land. And that shackles us to more expensive electricity. So electricity prices are going to go up as a result of what Trump is doing. So the first thing we're trying to do is stop him from his ruinous efforts to give us more expensive electricity. That's the first thing we're doing. And I hope we're going to have some success in this regard. We're fighting him. My former attorney, Nick Brown, our attorney general, has sued him, 15, 20 times by now, and he's won a whole bunch of preliminary injunctions. So that's the first thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing, again, is trying to get people technology which is less costly for fuel. And that includes electric vehicles. That includes heat pumps, which can be more efficient than other fossil fuel-based systems. That includes getting electric transportation in our public transportation system. That includes upgrades, HVAC systems in our schools. And we're doing that from the Cap and Invest bill, which takes that money, gives it to consumers, so that they can buy more efficient, less costly systems of heating and moving around. And that's having a success. And that's why voters overwhelmingly approved it and rejected the other guy's argument that this was actually cheaper energy. No, they want to keep us addicted to more expensive forms of energy. Look what's going on now with oil prices, which are so volatile given the world security situation that we live in. So for a variety of reasons, that's why consumers want cheaper energy, and that's the route we're on.
So I'm getting a question from, it looks like from one of our panelists here, and it says fossil fuel industry outspends the clean energy industry and sustainability-minded industry participants at large, both with respect to campaign financing and lobbying. And they say that lobbying is approximately 3 times the spend from the fossil fuel industry. And they ask, what can those of us who are in favor of clean energy and sustainability, what can we do to get organized to combat this?
Well, a lot. Obviously, being politically active in any way we can, find a candidate who's going to be for clean energy, support them, find a candidate who is not, and defeat them. It's a lot easier to defeat them and remove them in office where they can retire to private life than it is to change their minds, frankly. But try to change their minds as well. But mostly defeat people who stand in the doorway here and block progress. But the key to that, I have been increasingly convinced, is more intensive, more frequent, more long duration communication on this subject. That's where I actually think our largest gap is against the opponents. Where they really outspend us is in communication. And we spend absolutely crumbs as a nation in communicating to people the message that clean energy is cheaper, it's cleaner, it's healthier, and we spend almost nothing actually promoting that method. Now, I'm trying to do something about that. I'm working with the Clean Power Organization to be a spokesperson for them everywhere I can. But we need to build our communication infrastructure to get people to understand this situation. I'll give you an example, one little factoid. If you ask Americans if there is a scientific consensus about carbon causing climate change, only 1 out of 5 people will say yes. They don't know. Because they hear all this rigmarole from the fossil fuel guys that this is still an open question. They don't know that these efforts will give you more expensive electricity. They simply don't know because nobody tells them. So I actually believe increasing the investment in communication infrastructure, even separate from electoral politics, is very, very important. And I'm trying to sound that alarm.
Keep doing that, please.
I will. Tell your friends.
So here's a question from Lisa Friedman at the New York Times, Texas. Governor, can you talk about what you're hearing from climate activists these days? Your optimism is evident. How would you describe the state of the climate community right now? And do you expect environmental groups to change their strategies at all going forward? What were the lessons to be learned from the elections for the environmental community? What kind of lessons should we all be taking away from this last election?
Well, as far as the state of the team, it is coming back. Look, we took a blow. There's no question about it. It's a big body blow. It was very shocking to a lot of people. And it just is, we're emotional animals. We respond to hormones in our endocrine system, and that was down, right, for several months. But we're coming back. The protests that we saw last weekend, I was in the first maritime protest. We had hundreds of people, over 2,000 people got on a ferry boat. So, we said, one if by land, two if by sea, we're coming for democracy, so we came by the protest by water. And the animal spirits are arising again. I'm very happy about this. People are now getting their feet underneath them. They're getting involved back on electoral politics. They're getting back to be more ambitious on their efforts. They're arousing the troops. They're encouraging one another. So I feel we're on the upswing in that regard. But we're going to have to be resilient because we are going to suffer some losses to these tax cuts. The R&D losses at our universities is maybe the long term might be the most disturbing thing at the moment. And we should just redouble our efforts to find state replacement for these losses. And that's where a cap and invest system is, frankly, the longest pole in the tent of the many things that we can do. This is the most important in state activity. So I'm glad we're back and that we got people to fight with.
From one of our panelists, David Bookbinder, he's asking, what climate or energy policies do you think have the greatest chance of being implemented in red states?
Interesting question. In some red states with current Republican leaderships in those states, there's a particular interest in nuclear power, and I am hopeful that fusion comes along. We have 4 fusion companies in my state. We have companies actually going to probably begin construction of the first really commercial scale 50 megawatt commercial fusion reactor. Zero waste, right? This is not fission, this is fusion. Zero waste, almost zero meltdown possibilities. And they're actually going to be in construction maybe during this year. And that's something that I think would enjoy a lot of support in red states. Anything that can help the agricultural industry to make through this transition because of a particular favoritism to that part of our economy can be productive. And any subsidy to help manufacturing for advanced manufacturing, advanced batteries, cars, and everything else. Just got a way to finance it. So these states will take money if you get it, right? You just have to wait to generate it. So any way you can do that, it'll work.
Yeah, you gotta generate the revenue to be able to do some of those, and you've definitely demonstrated in Washington that you can do all of it.
That's the key.
Let me ask you another question in terms of advocacy, and this is more maybe on the international front. You were very involved in something called America's All In last fall, and you recall in Trump's first administration that it was we are all in. We are still in. I think that's what we call that. Right. And I believe you did that with Lisa Jackson. But since then, that's now kind of passed over to Gina McCarthy and maybe Governor Pritzker and Mayor Bibb from Cleveland. So can you talk about America's All In today and what they're doing and where it is today?
Well, it was a mechanism just to give people to hang their hat on this effort, know we were all in it together. And it is very important because it's really important to recognize you can do work in this in almost any organizational realm at any level. And that's really important because first off, there was a thought, well, you have to be in an international UN agreement to be effective. Well, that's just not true. There's a thought that, well, you have to be in Congress to be effective, or you have to be involved in federal effort. That's not true because states can act. Counties can act, cities can act, companies can act. I just had a cup of coffee with a guy yesterday who's a major leader of a major corporation. And he's talking about his supply chain work that he's still doing. Even though Trump's in office, he's still trying to improve his supply chain to decarbonize it. So the point of this was to get people to realize wherever you are, whatever station in life, whether it's a school district or a church or a company, we all got a role to play here. And that statement is important to get people to get on the team and pull on the rope.
I think it was super helpful to have We're Still In because it did give everybody a place to hang their hat, as you said, and to rally around. And I remember the event in San Francisco, and there was just like this enthusiasm, like what we're talking about on this call,
right.
Of everybody in the room of what can be done and how it can be done and what are the benefits. I'm not seeing as much of that conversation from the America's All In, and I'm hoping that will ramp up, but I haven't seen, do you know why that we're not hearing as much from them these days?
I don't know. It might be bandwidth. We got a guy in the White House that tends to dominate the headlines, and it might be just bandwidth, but the action on this, as the people on this call would suggest, is still profound. And I don't think there's any diminished interest in this across the United States. There's just a diminished number of people particular in the Senate and Congress, but not in the American people, as our great win suggested on winning 62-38. There was no diminishment in my state. I don't think there is in the nation, actually. It's just that we got a particular party in charge right now that wants to go backwards, and it's most unfortunate. Now, that may change. I think there's a chance the House of Representatives will change in November to stop further regression. So hopefully the cavalry is on the way.
We're seeing a lot of other countries kind of step in, and I wonder if they're going to be able to step up their climate ambition to replace. I mean, they're not going to be able to replace, but you do see them stepping up on climate change. Do you think? Well, I was going to say, do you think that Trump stepping in and trampling on climate has had any positive impact on the rest of the world? Do you think they're doing more now? Or do you think I'm just curious if you think they're able to, if there was any positive?
Well, I don't really believe so, no. It's positive for them because, some of the researchers that previously we'd funded, now other countries are trying to poach them. They're trying to poach some of these researchers from our universities and go to work in Heidelberg and Beijing instead of Seattle and San Francisco. And so that's actually harmful to us. It might be helpful to them, but harmful to us. Yeah, I don't think so. I think people are just sad around the world that the United States is not an active part. I think it's sadness. I don't think has spurred them. They recognize, but the world is moving forward. You look at the EV, and this is economically disadvantageous to us. You look at BYD, the Chinese EV manufacturers just coming on like crazy. And because they made some really big investments, the EV industry was interested in China because they decided to invest in shorter range and less expensive models. And so they've been selling them like crazy because they figured out that consumers figured out you don't drive 300 miles a day, you drive 30. Yeah. And so you don't need a car that goes 300 miles. And they have served that market, and they're just been the number one selling thing, which we'd rather be more domestic manufacturer here.
Yeah, we need to have more of that here. Hey,
the saddest thing is losing these markets. That's the saddest thing.
No kidding.
They were all United States manufacturers.
No, definitely, and that's what IRA was trying to do. Hey, here's a question from the audience. Governor Inslee, you mentioned you were participating with a particular organization now as an educational spokesperson and advocate. Can you please repeat the name of this organization and the goals?
It's called Climate. It's called Climate Power. And Climate Power it sort of started when the effort was to get the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's an organization that the part I'm involved in is basic communications. So they get me to go talk on cable TV shows and podcasts, and any place there's 3 people that will listen. So they send me out there to talk about this, and it's been an effective organization. I've really enjoyed working with them. We've got some really great young people working for them, and so I'm really happy about that.
I think it's important that you're out there, and I'm, for one, very appreciative, and I can see from all of the audience questions that others are as well. So here's a question. Sometimes we hear about carbon leakage, where carbon intensive industry goes to areas that have less strict or no carbon or no fee program on carbon. How can we turn this around by providing more financial incentive to companies to move back to the West Coast with progressive energy programs like Washington State? And how do we get them to move back to the West Coast?
Well, first off, what I'll say is at the prices that we have had for the carbon market, I just have not heard business people in my state saying, well, this is going to drive us to Indonesia or this is going to drive us to Peru. I just haven't heard that. At these levels, they really have not caused any offshoring of our domestic industries. That's number one. I think that's an important thing to say. Number two, to the extent that it is, I think some border adjustment fee provision, ultimately, this is why having a national cap and invest system would be preferable, so we can really have some border adjustment situation to deal with this, as we did in the the little amendment that I offered way back when to the original cap and invest bill in 2010, the Inslee Doyle amendment. So that is a mechanism, if we have a national system, that will be better if we can ever get to that. But it just has not risen to the level. Now, maybe prices could get high enough at some point where it does affect investment decisions and location decisions. I don't think we're anywhere close to that at the moment.
And, Washington State is voted continuously as one of the best places to live. I recognize that.
There's a lot of reasons for that. I'd like to say having good governors, but that's on the way down the number.
Oh, you have to have leadership, and I think that is part of the.
Well, this has been ranked by a whole bunch of rating systems as not only the best place to live, but best place to do business. We've been in the top 3 repeatedly, and the best place to work, which is, we're very proud of both doing a place to do business and a place to work. Very proud of that. And the reason is because we believe in innovation, we believe in high technology, we believe in bringing in talent from all around the world to grow these new companies. And we have a really high level of working people to invest in our working people and treat them fairly and to give them working wages and health care. Because when you invest in your workforce, you get great profitability and productivity. And so we think we've been successful in part because of some of our policies to have some of the best healthcare measures. We've got the first long-term care provision in America, and the best financial aid package so your kid can afford a college education in the country. So these investments in our people have paid off.
And if I remember right, there were a number of large corporates that were defending your Climate Commitment Act last fall.
Yes.
That was great to see.
Yes, we had great support from the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world, and the high-tech community has been very, very instrumental in moving these policies forward.
I need to hand this over to Alden at this point, but before I do, I just want to ask you one last question from Karen Reeves at S&P Global. First of all, she thanks you for doing this, and then she wants to follow up on the climate activist question. Why do you think corporate America has been towing the Trump line much more during the second administration than they did on the first administration?
Well, because the mob boss has now got more goons out on the trail, and I don't know how else to say it. During his first administration, he had some rational people who thought that they were very radical. They thought we should follow the Constitution. They thought we should follow the law. They thought they shouldn't be corrupt twice before breakfast. And those people restrained him. And he decided, I'm going to be unrestrained afterwards. I'm not going to be restrained by the Constitution. I'm not going to be restrained by the law. And I'll take corruption anytime I can get it.
Oh my God, yeah. Okay.
And so this is they're afraid.
It is different.
They're afraid of being abused. They're afraid of being repeatedly audited. They're afraid of losing grants. They're afraid of losing contracts because the guy wants to be an autocrat and he doesn't want to follow the law. And, Nick Brown, my attorney general, I thought he had the best line. He says, look, all we expect from him is to follow the damn law. That's all we're asking here. And so these CEOs are afraid of that. And I have been critical of those who have collapsed because of this fear. I wrote an op-ed in The Guardian a couple months ago, thrashing the law firms that capitulated and criticizing the colleges that have capitulated, because if you do that, you're going to get autocracy. And, now you're starting to see some universities fight him. including Harvard. Finally, the American Bar Association just sued him for his attack on law firms a couple days ago. So people are now starting to push back. But
It's great.
you need to, or you lose democracy. And yes, you might run a risk. There's a risk at pushing back. But I believe something we fought for 200 over years, we ought to continue to fight for. And that means fighting and not getting rolled by this guy. It's too important to give up.
You are a great spokesperson for this issue. Don't stop fighting, please. We need you. And with that, I hope everybody will join with me in thanking the governor for spending a few minutes with us. And I'd like to then, and I get Alden to come on. Alden, can you take over from here and provide some context for our panelists?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Governor. That was
Thank you.
brilliant and really inspirational. I'm over here at the climate negotiations in Bonn, and there's a lot of despair about what's happening in the U.S. And I think your message that governors, mayors, business leaders, and others are still in this game is just what they need to hear. So thanks for all you've done and are continuing to do.
You bet. So Alden, what capacity are you in there?
I'm with a British think tank called E3G and working with Rising Carbon Initiative, Danny and others in the U.S. I've been in that space for a long time, and I'm actually setting up for some meetings for Nate Holtman, who's coming over here from the University of Maryland representing Americans
Great.
All In,
Great.
because negotiators from other countries want to meet with him and hear what the governors, the mayors, the business leaders, and others are doing to keep the flag flying on the climate fight in the U.S. in this administration. So it's
Great.
important work, important work. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Keep it up.
We will indeed. And thank you. And we're going to bring in the panel now to talk about what you just said and how people think we can build on your remarks. Maybe taking the privilege of the chair, since you're still with us, I could just say one thing we didn't talk much about is the mounting impacts of climate change, and that's a big focus in the international negotiations, and of course at home with the wildfires and the floods and the hurricanes and everything else. What did you do, and what can other governors and mayors do to help prepare for what's coming at us? Even if we went to net zero emissions overnight, which we're not going to do, the impacts are going to increase, as you know, for the next several decades because of inertia in the system. And yet our federal government is pulling back on NOAA monitoring, pulling back on FEMA, pulling back on a range of services to help people cope with these climate-related disasters. What message would you have for your citizens in Washington and for people in other states about how to maintain hope in this environment?
Several things. Number one, feel free to sue the Trump administration when they violate the law, trying to take away some of your benefits that by law need to be there. The Congress has passed a law that we have FEMA, and a law that we have assistance to people when your home's burned down, and a law that when you're flooded, you can get some help. That's the law of the United States. And when he tries to ignore the law, get your attorney general of your state to sue him. That's number one. Number two, adopt a carbon pricing system that develops $3.2 billion that are available to help people in these situations, which is what we've done. And we are helping people to give them some more resilience, to have more Firewise programs, to harden your home. I don't know if we're going to replace the latest story in New York Times is Trump killed an $80 million program to build a levee around Grays Harbor, Washington, an area that voted for him about 65%. And now he's trying to drown his people who voted for him by taking away the money for this levee. Now, can the state replace that? I'm not sure, but if you have a pricing system like we do, you can generate the money to help communities harden themselves to rising waters and increasing fires. So step in for the federal government every way you can, but that takes revenue, and this is the best way to generate it.
Well, great. That's a great answer. Thanks so much. Have you got a few more minutes, or do you need to jump off now?
Yeah, no, I got a few more minutes. I got about 10 minutes here.
Well, let me ask my fellow panelists to come in, David and Shu Ting and Alex, and turn on their cameras and just open it up and see if we can have a conversation and some questions and dialogue with you. Shu Ting, you you want to say something about carbon border adjustments and the opening the governor did there on the need for a national price on carbon? It seems right up your alley.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Alden. Thank you so much, Governor Inslee, for your work. And I think you mentioned the keyword carbon pricing and carbon border adjustments quite a few times in your remarks just now. We all know the European Union is moving ahead with its carbon border adjustments starting from next year on January 1st, which is to go with their domestic emissions trading system, cap and trade. Meanwhile, on the US side, we've seen quite a few so-called carbon border adjustment proposals without any sort of domestic carbon pricing policies. They would levy carbon tariffs on certain imported goods. What do you think about those, and where do you think the US can do to improve and work with our allies?
Well, forgive me for being critical, but if you don't have your own internal price, I'm not sure you're really justified having a tax on imports if you're not putting a cost on your own emissions. I mean, they kind of have to go together, it seems to me. Otherwise, it's just another disguised tariff. I mean, I guess to me, it just doesn't seem plain fair to tax the other guy for emissions when you're not doing your own. So this violates the taint fair rule and probably will not lead to international agreement on how we tackle this problem if nations start to just have disguised tariffs and call them border adjustments on carbon. So I think you got to have your own pricing system to make it tenable.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Go ahead, Xiuting. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And I think a lot of the narrative towards US carbon tariffs without a domestic carbon price is based on the narrative the US is performing better. We have a carbon advantage, especially compared to some of the developing countries. But as you mentioned a few times in your remarks, it's important that we have our domestic policy so our domestic producers can continue to decarbonize going forward.
Yeah.
Back to you, Alden.
Thanks, Xiuting. That's an important point. David, I see you've got a hand up. What would you like to say to the governor or ask him?
Sure. My previous question was what policies could red states or what carbon, climate, or energy policies that you thought that red states might embrace? My question is, how come more blue states haven't taken advantage of things they have plenary authority for? There are only 3 states with a low carbon fuel standard. Not a lot of blue states have enacted policies about the kind of electricity that's sold within the states, mandating the sale of low carbon electricity, such that to the extent that electricity is imported from high carbon producing states, they wouldn't be able to sell it in a blue state with such policies. Many states have, but a whole lot of blue states have not adopted these and other policies. And I'm just kind of curious as to, what can be done to encourage those states.
Well, I could only be governor one state at a time. So I can't,
Good point.
And I don't have.
You haven't mastered cloning yet.
Maybe reverse. Why has Washington moved a little faster than some other states? Well, maybe because we have an environmental ethic that is embedded in our people. We have had lucky leadership. We're a high-tech community. We're not afraid of the future. We tend to embrace it and look at, So there are, I guess, several reasons. But the 24 states that are in the U.S. Climate Alliance, I will say all of them in some fashion have adopted some forward policies in some dimension. And I feel very good about that. But you got to continue to win at the ballot box to continue them. Michigan adopted some good policies, but then lost the legislature, and that may be challenging in the future. So you got to continue to win on electoral politics. I think that it's sort of the arc of progress You start with 100% clean requirements, as we have, and various states have done that. Then you move forward, you go up the tree, and the top of the tree at the moment is a carbon pricing system. But I think these people are moving in that direction. They do the first easier lifts first, and many of these states have done them. So now we want to continue their ambitions to move forward. And I do think that there's some still misunderstanding amongst the political classes about the salience of this issue. They have not recognized that you can win races based on clean energy. And you can do it by attacking your opponent who's against cheaper energy, who wants to enslave you to more expensive energy. You can attack your opponent on that. Not enough politicians have recognized the capability of that. I ran as governor in 2012. I may have been one of the first governors to get elected by running on this issue and recognizing its positive, aggressive value in a political campaign. So we got to get more politicians to recognize that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, when I was at Union of Concerned Scientists way back in the 90s, we pioneered the renewable electricity standard and helped pass it in states across the country, starting in the Great Plains, Texas, other red states. And we didn't sell it as a climate measure. We sold it as a fuel diversity, as an economic rural development measure. And when the Koch brothers and their allies went in after helping defeat the Waxman-Markey bill and tried to roll back those standards, they didn't succeed in any state. None of the 30 states that had them rolled them back because they were phenomenally popular. They were delivering jobs. They were delivering money to farmers. They were reducing fuel bill imports. So we got to be smarter about how we project and message around some of this stuff. Sure, it's good for the environment, and that's the reason a lot of us are doing it. But it's also good for the economy. It's good for security. It's good for fuel diversity. It's good for the local environment in terms of cutting pollution. So I think that's part of why you were successful, having heard some of your allies and advisors in a previous PCI meeting describe the messaging. Yeah.
I don't want to leave this without mentioning health as well, because health is a very important message in this. We probably should lead with it. Children's asthma, toxicity associated with carbon pollution. Health has got to be one of our 1, 2, 3 issues talking about this. And you can win on a health issue without even mentioning the word climate. Fundamentally, this is about human health, both mental and physical, not just the polar bears. So we lean heavily on that message in our victory as well.
Great. Alex, come on in with a question or comment for the governor.
Thanks, Alden. Thanks, Governor. Yeah, we heard a question about linkage between carbon markets, and it strikes me that, and Washington State, utilities in Washington State are currently considering participation in different regional electricity markets. Strikes me that interstate collaboration at a moment when the federal government is sort of stepping back presents major opportunities to make faster progress and also do so at lower cost. So beyond just those 24 U.S. Climate Alliance states sort of making progress through their own individual work in their own individual states, are there other ways that you see opportunities for state-to-state collaboration in order to make this kind of progress faster? And if so, how do we initiate or engage those conversations with governors across multiple states?
Well, you bet. We can and we are. There's active conversations with California, Quebec, and Washington State now to actually merge markets. And that is a realistic prospect. So I'm very excited by that. And I think we will succeed in that regard. And that helps everybody, obviously, to have more stability in the market, reduce volatility, increase political stability. So yes, we'd like to move forward, and those discussions are moving forward as we speak. So hopefully we'll have 3 groups in the Western world involved in that soon. And then we'll give credit to Republican Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jerry Brown and the ministers from Quebec.
And Governor, I know you were very active when you were governor in trade missions for the state of Washington, going to markets around the world. meeting with foreign leaders, meeting with your counterparts, subnational leaders in those other countries. What can you say about the potential there at a time when our federal government is launching?
Well, we've had just peripheral conversations about that. I've thought that it's probably better to
Wars and
focus
tariffs to
on.
use climate technology, climate cooperation from current political environment?
I'm sorry, I think I lost you a little bit there, Alden. But what I was saying is that we haven't progressed very far of having, an agreement between Washington and Europe. We've decided to sort of focus on Quebec and California first, but there's no reason that can't be done. It becomes a little more difficult when you get to border issues because of federal, either preemption or ease of application. But it's certainly that could be done, and we'll probably take the low-hanging fruit first.
Great. Well, thanks. I know you probably have to go. If so, feel free to drop off. And thanks again for
thank
your
you
time with
again.
us.
I want to thank whatever anybody's doing on this. Thank you. You're working for my grandkids. I hope the sponsors will send me all your contacts. Let's stay in touch. If you got a brilliant idea, send it my way. These are great
We
days
will
to work
indeed.
with you. Thanks a million. Be
Thanks
well.
so much. Thanks so much, Governor.
Till next time.
Well, that was great, and let's just go through and get a final round of thoughts and comments on what you heard tonight from the governor. And that was a great interview, Janet. You really engaged him, and it's too bad he's not very enthusiastic, but you did your best to get him out of his shell. So Shu Ting, what was your overall take on the conversation and what you heard?
Yeah, I thought Governor Inslee's remarks were really interesting and important. He talked a lot about state, regional, and local actions on climate change. I would like to make one point, taking us to the multinational climate space. No single country alone can solve the climate change. Not the United States by itself, or not the European Union by itself. We all need to collaborate and work together. There has been a theme coming out of the Trump administration after he went into the office on January 20th this year. In January, he decided to officially start the process of withdrawing the United States from the Paris Agreement. In March, he pulled U.S. representation in the UN climate finance initiatives. In April, when the UN International Maritime Organization reached the world's first global carbon tax on shipping emissions, United States representatives walked out of the negotiations in the beginning of the meeting. On top of that, the Trump administration sent out a letter trying to block the discussions on the global carbon tax and also threatened to impose reciprocal measures for any countries that are implementing the global carbon tax. I think that would pose significant challenges for the United States going forward as a collaborator and partner with our allies and friends on solving climate change. We really need all the technologies, talent, and funding. I'm a bit concerned about that, but following Governor Inslee's very positive note, I think there are still opportunities we can work on, and Eldon, you're doing some very important work. So we'll see where this all leads us to.
Yes, indeed, we will. Alex, what are your thoughts on the conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Alden, for leading us through a great conversation. I mean, I leave inspired by the governor's energy, of course. I think I want to just say maybe two things. One that wasn't said explicitly, but is evident, just based on the governor's work over decades now, is it's important to remember, even though this conversation has sort of been state policy opportunities in context of federal rollbacks and the climate disaster that's sort of taking place at the federal level right now, that states were always the place where forward-looking action to make progress to close our emissions gaps was going to be necessary. It's where the action was. EDF conducted an analysis last year indicating that if those 24 U.S. Climate Alliance states fulfilled their commitments fully, that would be fully half of the total emissions mitigation necessary to meet the U.S.'s national 2030 NDC. So states and state leadership was and remains critically important. That said, we're in a unique moment now where redoubling those efforts are perhaps more necessary, or at least feel more necessary than ever before. And we heard the governor say many times, or sort of tout the progress made in Washington, and suggest that a major opportunity for other states would be to adopt similar policies. If every state in the U.S. had a cap and invest program like Washington, this would be an extraordinarily different conversation. So again, states have the authority and the opportunity to make the kind of progress that makes what's happening with the Trump administration right now significantly less important to our overall progress. The last thing I just want to say is I think that there are major opportunities for collaboration across states, as I alluded to in the question of the governor. I think that is critical for a couple reasons. One is it allows us to go deeper and faster in terms of our emissions mitigation, but it also allows us to meet the moment as regards major affordability concerns that we see in the public. And so in addition to linkage, I just highlight two others that we're working on extensively. One is RGGI model rule adoption for the updated rule. And then the second is this regional electricity market in the West, both of which have the potential to drive significant additional mitigation and meet cost concerns of consumers. So really appreciated the conversation and the governor's leadership. And thank you, Alden.
Great. Thanks a lot, Alex. And thanks for jumping in at short notice to replace your colleague, Pam, who couldn't be with us for personal reasons. You did a great job. That was great to have you with us. And David, last but not least, I mean, you've been in this space for a long time and sort of been up and down through administrations, dealt with regulatory action, regulatory rollbacks. It struck me the governor was a little sanguine about the prospect of federal preemption and Trump's efforts likely to try to impede states like Washington, California, others moving forward. Did it strike you that way, or do you think he was right to say it's not a threat?
Well, so far, aside from revoking California's vehicle waiver, the steps that Washington has taken have been rather clumsy and amateurish. They filed, 4 lawsuits against Hawaii, Michigan, New York, and Vermont that were kind of ludicrous. 2 of them, I think it was Michigan and Hawaii, was you said in the future you're going to do something, and we're going to sue you right now to stop you from doing it. So, I mean, those are cases that will simply be dismissed by courts right off the bat. You can't sue someone for something they haven't done yet. So that's kind of, I'm not really worried about that. What I am more concerned about, and you hinted to this when you talked about the pendulum. And yes, we've gone back and forth, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, progress back, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing something different now, which is the gutting of EPA. So assuming we get a friendly administration in 2028 that is concerned about climate, there's not going to be a lot left of EPA to work on those rules and bring them back. And that's of long-term concern. I mean, it's not just EPA. All of the government agencies are getting hollowed out from the inside. And I think EPA has lost 10% of its people in the first 4 months of this administration, and they're heading for the exits. And I don't blame them, between the ones that are getting axed and the people who just realized that, they'd be spending the next 4 years trying to undo things they've worked for all their lives. So that's what I'm most concerned about at the federal level is the destruction of the very infrastructure of government that would allow future administrations to make progress on the national level.
Yeah, that's right. And the governor sort of hinted at that with the comment about Heidelberg and Beijing and other places stealing talent from American universities. You could say the same thing about the federal government and the
Yep.
scientists and technical workers there. And as you said, it's dispiriting for the people that are in those jobs, and many of them, as you said, are now leaving, but also it sort of may have a chilling effect on next generation willingness to work for the federal government if they think it's going to be a back and forth, unstable place, not secure, not respecting scientific integrity, et cetera. A lot of my former colleagues at Union of Concerned Scientists are working heavily on this issue, and I know they're quite concerned, much more than they were in the first administration, even of President Trump. So that is a threat. Anyone want to say anything more before I hand it back to Danny to close us out? Any additional thoughts or comments on what the governor had to say?
Well, we
All
can
right.
call him the new happy warrior.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm old enough to have been a child when Hubert Humphrey was coming up through Minnesota and then running for vice president and president, and he was the happy warrior. And Governor Inslee sort of struck me as an incarnation of Hubert Humphrey, suffering the slings and arrows and sort of like a duck having the water roll off his back somehow and not having it affect him. He was very inspirational. So Danny, thanks to you and Jason and C2ES for organizing this. It was, I think, as some people have already said, a shot in the arm, inspiration and hope. But turn it over to you as director of PCI to take us home.
Yeah, thanks, Alden, and thanks to everybody on the panel. Thanks to everybody who's viewing this. We really appreciate you being here. On the comment that Alden just made, I usually have to keep myself going by reminding myself that in the United States, we suffer from sampling bias. If all we're comparing ourselves to is the United States, that is biasing us to the reality around the world. As Shuting pointed out, this is a global problem. Every other developed economy has a carbon price. And there was a report from the World Bank state trends, and the percentage of emissions that are now covered by a carbon price has jumped from 24% to 28%. So 28% of emissions worldwide are now covered by some form of carbon pricing. So I usually have to comfort myself with things like that, but to have someone who has played such a role in moving things forward and, as you said, Alden, borne so many slings and arrows in Congress, in the governor's office, and as a presidential candidate, and can still bring that kind of energy. That is remarkable. And it was nice that he just wanted to hang out with us for as long as he did. So thank you again to everybody for being here. Stay tuned for future communications from the Pricing Carbon Initiative on topics like this. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.